Today, we're exploring a chilling case that baffled investigators for decades. It centers on a young girl who vanished from her own bedroom during the night without a sound. Even more disturbing, her sister, who was sleeping beside her, later described something deeply unsettling. She claimed a figure wearing what looked like a wizard's hat took her away. The mystery remained unsolved for 35 long years, until shocking answers finally surfaced in 2024. Jessica Gutierrez was born on December 3, 1981, in South Carolina. She was the youngest child in her family, with 2 older sisters and a brother. Not long after Jessica was born, her parents separated, leaving her mother, Debbie, to raise 4 children alone. The family lived in a small town called Edmond, not far from the state capital. Life wasn't easy. Debbie struggled to make ends meet without help. But despite the hardship, the family shared a strong bond. When Debbie was at work, the older children took responsibility for watching over Jessica. Whenever she had time off, Debbie made an effort to create moments of joy for all of them. On June 5, 1986, the day began like any other summer afternoon. 4-year-old Jessica played outside with her siblings while Debbie finished chores around the house. That evening, the family ate dinner together before settling in for the night. Normally, Jessica slept in her mother's bed, but that night was different. Her brother was suffering from an earache, so Debbie let him sleep beside her instead. Because of that change, Jessica went to bed with her sisters. The oldest slept in a separate bed, while one sister lay next to Jessica. The following morning, Debbie woke up around 9 a.m. and that's when everything changed. Early that morning, 6-year-old Rebecca, who had slept beside Jessica, walked into her mother's bedroom and asked for breakfast. As Debbie got up and stepped into the hallway, she immediately sensed that something wasn't right. The front door, which she always locked before bed, was standing wide open. Their dog, usually kept outside, was running freely through the house. As Debbie moved toward the back, she noticed a curtain rod lying on the ground beneath a window. The window's protective screen had been removed. Her heart sank. She rushed into the girl's bedroom. Jessica was gone. Papers were scattered across the floor. When Debbie asked where her youngest daughter was, Rebecca calmly said, "She's gone." A man with a beard and a magic hat took her. At first, Debbie assumed her 6-year-old was confused or joking. She ran outside, thinking Jessica might have wandered into the yard. When she wasn't there, Debbie searched every room in the house, hoping this was some kind of hide-and-seek game. But it wasn't. Real panic set in. Debbie returned to the bedroom and pressed Rebecca for answers. The girl repeated the same story. Frustration and fear overwhelmed Debbie, and she began yelling, asking why Rebecca hadn't screamed or tried to stop the man. That's when Rebecca explained more. She said she had woken up during the night and saw a bearded man wearing a wizard-like hat standing next to their bed. He gently lifted Jessica, who never woke up, and carried her out of the room. Rebecca said she was terrified. She pulled the blanket over her head, believing she was having a nightmare. Eventually, she fell back asleep and didn't think to mention it in the morning. Realizing her daughter might be telling the truth, Debbie immediately called the police. Officers searched the home and determined that Jessica had likely been abducted. They believe the intruder entered through the living room window after removing the screen. A fingerprint was discovered on the outside of the glass. Nearby, police also found a cigarette pack and several cigarette butts. Treating the case as a kidnapping, investigators placed a recording device on Debbie's phone in case the abductor attempted to make contact. Rebecca repeated her story to police, adding that the man had unplugged the fan and nightlight before approaching the bed. She never saw his face, leaving investigators with little to work with. Police then focused on Debbie, bringing her in for questioning. She was asked to recount the previous day in detail. During the interview, she mentioned someone she strongly suspected, a man she had recently ended a relationship with. She described him as controlling, aggressive, and a heavy drinker. He hadn't taken the breakup well, and Debbie feared he might have taken her daughter out of revenge. Police contacted the man, but he denied any involvement. After investigating further, they found no evidence connecting him to Jessica's disappearance. Jessica's father was also ruled out. He lived out of state and had no opportunity to commit the crime. Meanwhile, the fingerprint recovered from the window was processed through the FBI database, but no match was found. With no suspects, authorities turned their attention to large-scale searches. Jessica's home sat on the edge of town, surrounded by vast open fields. Police searched abandoned buildings, wooded areas, rivers, and streams. The FBI joined the effort, but still no trace of the child was found. Flyers were distributed across nearby towns and throughout the state. An aircraft was sent up to scan the area from above. Days passed with no results. Debbie, overwhelmed and caring for her remaining children, felt helpless. Communication from police was limited. 2 days after Jessica disappeared, she called the sheriff to ask whether the search would continue over the weekend. The call quickly became tense. Debbie accused authorities of not doing enough. The sheriff responded angrily, claiming he had been searching all night and warning that if she continued accusing him, he could pull his team and let the case go cold. The call was recorded. Debbie kept it. As weeks turned into months, her hopes slowly faded. Then, 10 weeks after Jessica vanished, the case took an unexpected turn. Police were investigating a string of crimes involving a local man. He attempted to break into a home, but fled when confronted. Soon after, he stole a van and drove to North Carolina, where he broke into another house and assaulted a woman while she slept. He was arrested shortly afterward, when his fingerprints were entered into the system. Investigators received an immediate hit. The prints matched those found on the window of Jessica's home. The suspect was a 27-year-old man named Thomas McDowell. And for the first time since Jessica disappeared, the case had a clear direction. When Debbie was told about the fingerprint match, she immediately recognized the name. She told investigators that she knew Thomas McDowell personally. She had met him through relatives, and only a few months before Jessica vanished, she had hired him to do work on her property. Over the course of 2 days, Thomas built a small, shed and repaired the awning over the front porch. Debbie also remembered something else that suddenly felt important. Thomas wore a beard and almost always had on a tall cowboy hat. Investigators began to wonder if Rebecca, who only saw the intruder briefly in the dark, might have mistaken the hat for the wizard hat she described similar to ones she had seen in cartoons. Despite these connections, police faced a major obstacle. Even with the fingerprint match, they believed there still wasn't enough evidence to make an arrest. Jessica's body had never been found, meaning authorities couldn't legally confirm she was dead. There was also a possible explanation for the fingerprint. Thomas had worked on the property before. In theory, he could have touched the window during that time. However, forensic experts noted something troubling. The fingerprint appeared fresh. It showed no signs of weathering or long-term exposure. Debbie also told police that she cleaned that window frequently when the children played outside and wanted to get her attention. They often ran up to the open window, leaned on the glass, and shouted to her. Their hands were usually dirty, so Debbie wiped the window regularly. Thomas had worked on the house roughly 6 months before the abduction. No other fingerprints were found on the glass. Investigators knew that if his print had been left back then, it almost certainly would have been wiped away. Debbie also recalled another detail. While Thomas was working at the house, she once accidentally locked herself out and had to climb through that same window. Thomas had seen her do it. Still, police remained unconvinced. They concluded that the evidence was not strong enough to charge him. In 1987, Thomas was convicted of assaulting the woman whose home he had broken into and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Debbie was devastated. She believed the man responsible for her daughter's disappearance was behind bars, but not for the crime that mattered most. Later that same year, another shocking development emerged. Thomas's cellmate contacted police and claimed Thomas had confessed to him. According to the cellmate, Thomas admitted that he had taken a young girl from her bedroom in South Carolina. He said he intended to assault her, but during the attack, the child bit him. Enraged, he killed her. He then dismembered her body and dumped the remains in a field. Investigators visited Thomas in prison. He did not deny the story. Instead, he said he would confess on one condition: full immunity. Authorities immediately rejected the demand. Once again, the case stalled. After learning this, the cellmate wrote directly to Debbie, telling her everything Thomas had said. She was horrified not only by the confession, but by the fact that nothing was done. Feeling abandoned by law enforcement, Debbie began investigating on her own. At one point, she tracked down an abandoned vehicle that had once belonged to Thomas. Inside, she noticed threads and fabric fibers on one of the seats. They appeared to match the color of the pajamas Jessica had been wearing the night she disappeared. Police showed little interest. They found it suspicious that Debbie, without forensic tools or training, claimed to have identified fabric fibers in a car. That same year, police in Kansas contacted local investigators. After finding a young girl who resembled Jessica, Debbie flew there immediately, but the moment she heard the girl speak from down the hallway, she knew it wasn't her daughter. Over the years, Debbie gave multiple interviews, openly accusing police of ignoring an obvious suspect. Nothing changed. In 1990, Jessica's case was featured on a nationally known television program about unsolved crimes. Tips flooded in, but every lead went nowhere. A year later, Jessica became the first missing child in South Carolina to receive an age-progressed image. At the time, the technology was new and experimental, but investigators hoped it might finally bring answers. It didn't. In 2007, more than 2 decades after Jessica disappeared, Debbie again spoke publicly. This time, she released the recording of her phone call with the sheriff, the one where he suggested he could pull his team and let the case fade away. The sheriff denied the accusation, claiming he had never stopped investigating and had actually increased efforts after the call. Debbie also revealed that for years she had tried to involve outside agencies, but those requests were repeatedly blocked by the local prosecutor's office. That same year, the case was officially reviewed. Once again, officials stated there was still not enough evidence to charge anyone. Then came a series of stunning revelations. In 2014, the sheriff was charged with fraud and bribery, eventually receiving a 12-month jail sentence. 2 years later, the prosecutor resigned after being arrested for a hit-and-run while intoxicated. In 2021, 35 years after Jessica vanished, a new sheriff reopened the case with the help of the FBI. 50 agents were assigned. Every piece of evidence was re-examined. This time, investigators reached a different conclusion. They not only believed there was enough evidence against Thomas McDowell, but they also uncovered new information. Friends and relatives revealed that shortly after Jessica's disappearance, Thomas dramatically changed his appearance. He shaved his beard, cut his long hair, and stopped wearing his trademark cowboy hat. They also confirmed that he smoked the same brand of cigarettes found near Jessica's home. No usable DNA was recovered, likely because the evidence had been tested multiple times over the years. Even so, the fingerprint and the prison confession carried significant weight. In January 2022, Thomas McDowell was arrested at age 62. He pleaded not guilty. The trial finally began in January 2024. His defense argued that the fingerprint was left during his earlier work on the property. They also attempted to discredit Rebecca's childhood testimony, insisting a cowboy hat could not be confused with a wizard's hat. Prosecution experts disagreed, emphasizing the freshness of the fingerprint. A former inmate testified again, repeating Thomas's confession from decades earlier. Prosecutors pointed out that only someone involved would know certain details. On February 8th, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Thomas McDowell was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison at age 63. For Debbie, the verdict brought mixed emotions. Justice had finally come, but far too late. She believed Thomas could have been stopped decades earlier. Most painful of all, Jessica's remains were never found. Debbie and the new sheriff continue searching, though they know the odds are slim. After nearly 4 decades, investigators found it strange that the fingerprints were located at the exact spot where the detergent had spilled. It suggested that whoever grabbed the girl may have touched the nearby car in the process. Officers collected the prints and sent them for forensic analysis. while also working to identify the vehicle's owner to confirm the marks didn't belong to them. With no immediate suspects, police began canvassing nearby streets for witnesses. The laundromat employee told officers she hadn't seen anything alarming. She remembered Debbie sitting inside while the machines ran, then leaving with her box of detergent, likely heading home to ask someone to help carry the laundry back. Soon, however, a witness came forward whose account changed everything. 12-year-old Sandra had been walking toward the laundromat with a friend, helping carry clothes. As they approached, they saw a man grab a young girl in the street and force her into a car parked nearby. The girl screamed and struggled, but the man slammed the door, jumped behind the wheel, and sped off, nearly hitting Sandra and her friend as he fled. At the time, Sandra assumed it was a parent forcibly taking a child home and didn't tell anyone. Only after learning Debbie had vanished did she realize what she had witnessed. Sandra described the vehicle as a dark-colored pickup truck, likely from the late 1950s. She said the driver was a young white man with thick dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another girl from Debbie's apartment building also spoke to police. She recalled a dark pickup driving slowly past that evening. At first, she thought the driver was her uncle, but when the man stopped and looked directly at her, she realized it wasn't him. She described a white man with medium-length dark hair and added that the truck parked near the same spot where the spilled detergent was later found. A third witness soon emerged. A man driving to the hospital to visit his wife said a dark pickup, possibly a Dodge, nearly crashed into him before speeding away. He estimated the driver was around 30 years old with dark hair. Most disturbingly, he also saw a girl inside the vehicle, appearing to struggle as the driver restrained her with one hand. After hearing these accounts, police had no doubt Debbie had been abducted. Information about the suspect and vehicle was broadcast to patrol units, and a police sketch was created based on witness descriptions. While some officers searched for similar trucks and questioned their owners, others organized massive search efforts. Each day, more volunteers and officers from neighboring towns joined. Nearly 4,000 people participated, setting a record for the city and the state. Detectives questioned neighbors, family friends, Debbie's stepfather, and her biological father. All were ruled out. Her father, who lived nearby, had learned of her disappearance while at work and immediately joined the search. Police also reviewed known offenders living within a few miles of Debbie's home, but found no viable suspects. The search continued for over 2 weeks until January 29th. That day, student volunteers were assigned to comb a wooded area several miles from Debbie's home. After nearly 5 hours, one of them noticed marks on the ground leading off the trail, as if something heavy had been dragged. Following the trail about 150 feet into the woods, they discovered a body. It was Debbie Randall. She was wearing the same outfit her mother had described, a lavender dress and a dark blue hooded jacket. Her shoes, however, were missing. She still wore socks, but the lavender shoes she had received for Christmas, her favorite, were gone. An autopsy revealed she had been strangled and sexually assaulted. A single dark hair was found on her body, believed to belong to the killer. DNA testing didn't exist at the time, so experts could only examine it microscopically, concluding it likely came from a man between 18 and 30 years old. Debbie's clothes were heavily soiled with dirt. With few leads left, detectives brought in a geologist. Together, they identified a unique type of clay on her clothing, northern Georgia clay, mined less than 10 miles from the city. Another clay type found on her clothes came from a site just 2 miles from where her body was found. Investigators theorized that Debbie had been driven to multiple remote locations. They believe she was assaulted outside the city, then taken to another area where she was killed, and finally dragged into the forest. Forensic evidence supported this. Debbie was already dead when placed in the woods, and there were no signs of a struggle at the dump site. The clay locations were difficult to access, leading detectives to suspect the killer may have worked in those areas. Mining companies were contacted, but employee checks led nowhere. The fingerprints near the abduction site also failed to match any suspects. Debbie's murder devastated the community. Thousands attended her funeral. The case went cold. Lead detective Morris Nix never let it go. He had been only 19 when the crime occurred and worked it throughout his career. Over decades, he narrowed potential suspects to 4 men. When the FBI created a DNA database, the hair sample was finally tested. No match appeared. In 2015, the case was reopened. Debbie's clothing stored for decades was re-examined with modern methods. Biological material from an unknown man was found, but it produced only a partial profile. In 2018, Debbie's mother gave an interview, saying the unresolved case had destroyed her life. Weeks later, she died of cancer at 78 and was buried beside her daughter, Sandra. The childhood witness later said she had lived with guilt for decades, believing she should have intervened even if it meant dying herself. In 2019, new funding allowed for advanced testing. This time, a full DNA profile was recovered, but it still wasn't in the FBI database. In 2022, investigators turned to genetic genealogy. A Florida lab traced distant relatives through public DNA records. By 2023, the trail led to a family in Marietta. DNA testing confirmed the killer was a close relative. The suspect was identified as William Rose. There was one final twist. Rose had taken his own life. In 1974, just 2 years after Debbie's murder, police exhumed his body. The DNA matched. After 51 years, the case was solved. Rose had lived in the same apartment building as Debbie's family. Investigators believe he recognized her, seized an opportunity, and committed the crime. At the press conference, Debbie's brother Melvin thanked everyone who never gave up. He said he wished his mother had lived to see justice, but believed she was now reunited with Debbie. Investigators quickly run into another dead end. The fingerprints recovered from the scene were too distorted to be useful, and without modern DNA testing, the blood evidence couldn't be analyzed properly. With no solid proof tying him to the crime, authorities were forced to let James go. The investigation moved forward, but without direction. Over the years, detectives examined other possible suspects and questioned countless people. Yet no breakthrough came. Karen's murder left a permanent scar on the town. What had once been considered a quiet, safe community was now defined by a single act of violence. Residents whispered about the crime for decades, always wondering who could have done something so brutal. At the time, police kept the identities of suspects confidential. Only Karen's closest relatives and friends knew that James had ever been under suspicion. In later interviews, several family members admitted they believed he was responsible, but belief alone was never enough. To bring justice, Karen's father died in 1973, 7 years after her murder. Her mother passed away 4 years later, in 1977. Neither of them ever learned the truth about who killed their daughter. Paul eventually remarried. His second wife helped raise Karen's daughter, Paula, stepping into a role no one could ever fully replace, wanting to protect the child. The family chose not to tell her how her biological mother had died. As Paula grew older, she sensed that something was different. At school, other children teased her simply because her mother was gone. Fearing she might one day hear the truth from someone else or stumble upon it herself, the family finally told her what had happened. She was an adult by then. Paul passed away in 1989, never knowing who was responsible for his wife's death. For decades, the case remained frozen in time. Paula occasionally spoke to journalists, saying she still hoped the person responsible would one day be held accountable. She regularly contacted the police department, asking if there had been any new developments. Each time, the answer was the same. There were no leads. That changed at the end of 2022. One afternoon, police received an unexpected phone call. A 29-year-old man asked about Karen's case. He explained that he had grown up hearing about the murder. His grandmother spoke of it often. As it turned out, his family was distantly related to Karen's. While reading old newspaper clippings at work, he began wondering whether modern forensic technology might succeed, where older methods had failed. That curiosity led him to call the police. His question had an effect no one expected. The department decided to reopen the case. None of the original investigators were still alive. So a new team started from the beginning, carefully reviewing every report and piece of evidence. To their surprise, nearly everything except the original blood samples from the floor had been preserved and properly stored for more than half a century. This included Karen's clothing and multiple items collected from her home. All remaining evidence was sent to a forensic lab, where specialists examined each piece using modern techniques. At the same time, detectives began re-interviewing anyone still alive who had been connected to the case. 16 months later, the call finally came. Lab technicians had discovered small bloodstains on Karen's dress. From them, they extracted a DNA profile belonging to an unknown man. Investigators immediately sought a court order to obtain a DNA sample from James, who was still alive. The sample was collected and rushed to the lab. The results were undeniable. The DNA matched. It confirmed that James, who had been just 21 at the time, had been inside Karen's home on the day she was killed, and had lied about the injuries he suffered. On April 29, 2024, police returned to James's residence. At 79 years old, he was arrested for murder. When confronted with the evidence, James did not argue. He confessed. While authorities have not released the full details of his interrogation, James reportedly admitted that he had always known the truth would catch up with him. He was charged with first-degree murder and later released on bail due to his advanced age and serious health issues. Officials determined he posed no flight risk. Karen's relatives were devastated for them. The arrest came after more than 50 years of waiting too late to bring peace to those who had already died without answers. The motive has not yet been officially confirmed. According to reporting, investigators believe James had romantic feelings for Karen and harbored jealousy toward her husband. Alcohol may have played a role that night, luring his inhibitions and escalating his emotions. The first court hearing took place in late May, with more details expected to emerge during the trial. Despite everything, Karen's family expressed gratitude to the detectives who refused to let the case die. Still, many acknowledged the painful reality. Even if James were convicted, he likely wouldn't spend much time behind bars. Karen's daughter, now 57, said the call informing her of the arrest was the most important phone call of her life. She admitted she had long given up hope. She also said she believed James was responsible for her father's early death. He had spent years convinced his former friend was guilty, forced to watch him live freely. Next, Melissa Trimble was born on March 1, 1977, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Just 1 month later, she was placed for adoption. She was raised by Jeanette and Robert Trimble in Salem, New Hampshire. Melissa was lively and creative. She loved fashion, enjoyed singing, and developed a passion for reading at an early age. She had many friends and spent much of her free time at the Boys and Girls Club. When Melissa was 9, her adoptive parents divorced. Her father gradually disappeared from her life. Later, Jeanette began seeing a man named Robert. Though he never lived with them, on September 11, 1988, when Melissa was 11, her mother took her to Lawrence to meet Robert. They often spent time at a local bar, and since Jeanette had no one to watch Melissa, she frequently brought her along. Melissa usually played outside nearby, always told not to wander far. By then, she knew the neighborhood well and had made friends in the area. That afternoon, Melissa checked in with her mother periodically. During one visit, the bartender made her popcorn. Melissa said she'd return shortly and walked back outside. She never came back. By around 4 p.m., Jeanette grew worried. She searched her car and the nearby streets. Melissa was gone. Jeanette and Robert searched for hours. At 9 p.m., police were called. Officers joined the search, but darkness made it difficult. Though some considered the possibility that Melissa had run away, her mother insisted that Melissa was afraid of the dark and would never leave on her own. The next day, the search continued. Around 3 p.m., a railroad worker inspecting an old rail yard near the bar noticed something disturbing between 2 unused boxcars. As he approached, he realized it was a body. Police quickly identified the victim as Melissa Trimble. Her boys and girl's club card was found nearby. One of her legs had been severed, likely by a passing train, but detectives immediately questioned that explanation. Melissa's purse was discovered nearly 20 yards away. Nearby were footprints and blood drops, suggesting an attack had occurred there before her body was placed on the tracks. The rail yard was known as a gathering place for transients and drug users. Investigators suspected someone may have tried to stage the scene as an accident. An autopsy confirmed their fears. Melissa had been stabbed 3 times. She had bruises across her body. There was no evidence of sexual assault, and no usable DNA was found. The wounds indicated the attacker was likely left-handed. The case was officially ruled a homicide. Detectives began reconstructing Melissa's final hours, searching for witnesses, piecing together moments that would define one of the most haunting cases the town would ever know. Despite months of effort, investigators were left with only a single clue: the description of a van seen near Melissa shortly before she vanished. Police focused heavily on locating a vehicle that matched witness accounts, but every lead collapsed under scrutiny, even if they somehow identified the correct van. Proving its connection to the murder would have been nearly impossible. DNA testing was not yet available, and there was little chance Melissa's belongings or usable fingerprints would still be inside. Detectives continued searching for witnesses, questioning hundreds of residents in the surrounding neighborhoods. None of it led anywhere. After several months with no progress, the investigation slowly stalled. Melissa's case went cold. As media coverage intensified, public anger shifted toward Melissa's mother. Many were outraged that an 11-year-old child had been allowed to wander alone for hours, especially near a dangerous rail yard. The criticism grew harsher when reports surfaced that Jeanette had been drinking at a bar while her daughter was unsupervised. Newspapers fueled speculation, suggesting Jeanette had developed a drinking problem following her divorce and was struggling to care for her child. Others blamed social services, accusing them of failing to intervene before tragedy struck. Jeanette refused to speak publicly. She ignored reporters and declined interviews entirely. When journalists contacted Child Protective Services, the agency acknowledged that they were aware of the family's difficulties and had taken limited steps to monitor the situation. But they stated that removing Melissa from her mother's care had never been considered. Years passed with no meaningful updates. Investigators periodically reviewed the case, revisiting old suspects and theories, but nothing moved it forward. Then, more than a decade later, a new name briefly entered the picture. In 2000, detectives began looking into Tommy Lynn Sells, a serial killer who had confessed to more than 20 murders. Some aspects of his crimes bore similarities to Melissa's case. He physically resembled the man reportedly seen near the van, and he was known to sleep in abandoned boxcars while traveling across the country. However, after careful investigation, authorities ruled him out. There was no evidence placing Sells anywhere near Lawrence at the time of Melissa's murder. Records suggested he was likely in another state. Once again, the trail went cold. That changed unexpectedly in 2013. Police arrested a man from Lawrence on an unrelated charge. During questioning, he made a startling claim. He said he might know something about Melissa Trimble's murder. The man explained that in 1988, when he was just 13 years old, he regularly stole cars. He spent much of his time roaming the streets, searching for vehicles to target. On the day Melissa disappeared, he said he saw a girl who looked like her sitting on the steps outside the same bar. Standing near the girl was a man named Mike, someone the witness recognized. His family had warned him to stay away from Mike due to his reputation. The boy continued walking. About 10 minutes later, when he passed the area again, he saw the girl leaving the bar with Mike. Shortly after that, another unfamiliar man joined them, and the three walked away together. When asked why he had never come forward, the witness admitted that as a teenager, he wanted no interaction with police. He said he had considered telling someone after hearing about the murder, but his brother advised him to stay quiet. Detectives immediately noticed a serious inconsistency. The witness claimed it was dark when he saw the girl, but Melissa had been reported missing around 4 p.m. while it was still daylight. By that point, her disappearance was widely known, and her mother had been searching frantically for hours. Investigators concluded it was unlikely Melissa could have been sitting outside the bar unnoticed. They believed the witness may have been mistaken or had seen another child altogether. Still, they investigated Mike as a potential suspect, but found nothing linking him to the crime. Even so, the statement renewed interest in the case. In 2014, authorities officially reopened the investigation. By then, forensic science had advanced significantly. Detectives hoped that modern DNA analysis could succeed where earlier methods had failed. Melissa's clothing and other preserved items were re-examined, but no foreign DNA was found. However, investigators turned their attention to something overlooked for decades: biological material collected from under Melissa's fingernails. The samples had been taken in case she had scratched her attacker. This time, the results were different. Forensic experts detected traces of another person's skin cells. They were able to extract a DNA profile, but it was incomplete. The partial profile wasn't enough to generate a direct match in national databases. Still, detectives refused to give up. They contacted a private company specializing in genetic genealogy. Using the partial DNA, analysts searched for distant familial connections. The task was difficult, and certainty was impossible. But after extensive work, they identified a potential link to a family with the last name McClendon. Investigators began building a family tree, carefully examining which members could realistically be connected to the crime. This process took years, largely because the partial DNA couldn't definitively implicate anyone. Eventually, attention narrowed to 2 brothers. One of them was Marvin McClendon. Although Marvin lived in Alabama, records showed that in the late 1980s he had lived just 20 minutes from Lawrence. He worked as a carpenter and frequently visited a church, located only a few hundred yards from the bar where Melissa was last seen. Further digging revealed that Marvin had also worked as a prison guard for nearly 3 decades, with breaks in employment, one of which occurred in 1988. Police also discovered that Marvin owned an old brown work van during that time. He had no criminal record, aside from multiple traffic violations. He had been married twice, both marriages ending in divorce, and had 2 sons with whom he had little contact. One final detail stood out. Marvin was left-handed, while detectives continued building their case. Melissa's mother passed away in 2015 at the age of 70. She had battled serious illness for years and died without knowing who killed her daughter. By 2021, investigators concluded Marvin was the most likely suspect. They traveled to Alabama to question him. Marvin denied any involvement. When told that DNA linked one of his relatives to the crime, he suggested his brother might be responsible. Later that year, Marvin voluntarily provided a DNA sample. The results were frustrating. The partial profile from under Melissa's nails indicated that Marvin was either the killer or a very close relative of the killer. Investigators had already ruled out his relatives, leaving Marvin as the only remaining possibility. Still, without a complete DNA match, prosecutors knew a conviction would be difficult. Detectives continued searching for additional evidence. Mike, the man mentioned by the teenage witness, was tested and ruled out. After his DNA failed to match the sample. Police questioned Marvin repeatedly. Then, in April 2022, they made their decision. Marvin McClendon was arrested. During the arrest, he allegedly made a chilling comment to an officer. "At least I got to enjoy 20 years of my pension." At 74 years old, Marvin was jailed to await trial. Due to his former career as a prison guard and the nature of the charges, he was placed under constant protection, with no full DNA profile. The prosecution relied on elimination. The DNA belonged to someone in Marvin's family. No one else had the opportunity, proximity, or matching characteristics. Marvin lived nearby, owned a similar van, visited the area regularly, and matched the physical description given by witnesses. The trial began in December 2022. The defense immediately challenged the DNA evidence, arguing that a partial profile was insufficient for conviction. They called expert witnesses, including a forensic analyst who said crime scene photos didn't conclusively prove the attacker was left-handed, and a genetics specialist who explained that partial matches could point to numerous distant relatives. Marvin chose not to testify. After nearly a week of deliberation, the jury reported they were deadlocked. On December 27th, the judge declared a mistrial. In early 2024, prosecutors announced plans for a retrial scheduled for September 30th, 2024. Marvin, now 76 and suffering from multiple health issues, remains in custody. There is a real possibility he may not survive until the trial concludes, if the case ends without a conviction. Melissa Trimble's murder could remain unresolved forever. Next, Tonya Van Kylenborg was born on March 7, 1969, in Victoria, Canada. She grew up in a loving family with her parents and an older brother she adored. From an early age, Tonya loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She also longed to travel and see the world. In high school, she visited Paris with her best friend, a trip that permanently ignited her passion for travel. Shortly before graduation, at 18 years old, Tonya met Jay Cook. He was 2 years older and had already finished school. They were introduced through a mutual friend and soon began dating. After high school, Tonya decided to delay college so she could travel. She worked at a cafe and walked dogs to save money. Jay also skipped college, instead helping his father run a small heating installation business. In November 1987, Jay's father needed a specific part that local suppliers didn't have. The closest location was Seattle, Washington. Unable to go himself, he asked Jay to make the trip. Jay agreed and invited Tonya. They planned a quick journey, leave Victoria in the morning, reach Seattle by evening, and return the next day. Jay's father provided a van, money for expenses, and a $700 check for the part. Though given funds for a hotel, Jay and Tonya decided to sleep in the van instead. The trip required two ferries, one to Port Angeles and another across Puget Sound. On the morning of November 18th, the couple set off. They were expected home the following afternoon. They never returned. As hours passed, both families grew increasingly concerned. Knowing the ferry schedules, they realized something was wrong. At first, they hoped Tonya and Jay had simply decided to explore or missed a ferry. By evening, fear replaced optimism. The next morning, both families went to the police and reported them missing. At first, local police saw no clear reason to launch a large-scale search. Tonya was 18, Jay was 20, and there was no direct evidence suggesting a crime. Officers assumed the couple had simply decided to take an unplanned trip and advised their families to wait a few days before worrying. That response didn't sit well with either family. Tonya's parents knew their daughter wouldn't disappear without calling. Jay was scheduled to complete an important job for his father's business and had never been careless or unreliable. If they had chosen to stay longer, there were plenty of pay phones along the route. There was no reason for complete silence. Convinced something was wrong, Tonya's father decided to act on his own. The families first confirmed that Tonya and Jay never arrived in Seattle to collect the heating part. The supplier said he waited for hours, but the couple never showed up. That discovery immediately raised alarm. Next, Tonya's father drove the entire route toward Seattle, scanning rest stops, pullovers, and roadside areas. He found nothing, no sign of the van, no trace of the couple. Refusing to give up, he hired a private company and rented a helicopter to search the region from above. Dense forests made visibility nearly impossible, and once again, the effort yielded no results. He then printed missing person flyers and traveled to Seattle, posting them throughout the city. For days, both families did everything they could. Think of while police remained largely passive. Eventually, the pressure forced authorities to take the case more seriously. Still, investigators believed Tonya and Jay were likely alive and would return on their own. Their response was limited to notifying Seattle area police and distributing a description of the van. Everything changed on November 24, 5 days after the disappearance. A man walking near a wooded area roughly 90 miles north of Seattle noticed something beneath a tree near a roadside embankment. When he looked closer, he realized it was a human body and immediately contacted authorities. Police arrived and found the body of a young woman. Her hands were bound. Much of her clothing was missing, and she had been shot in the head. There was very little blood at the scene, indicating she had been killed elsewhere and dumped. With no identification on the body, detectives reviewed recent missing person reports. The description matched Tonya van Kuylenborg. Her father was contacted and asked to identify the body. At the morgue, his worst fear was confirmed. Investigators now knew Tonya had been murdered, but Jay was still missing. Because the van was also gone, police briefly considered whether Jay could somehow be involved. His family strongly rejected that idea. Jay had no history of violence, didn't own a gun, and was deeply in love with Tonya. Before investigators could resolve that question, another crucial call came in. A bartender in the town of Bellingham, about 18 miles from where Tonya's body was found, had discovered a wallet and keys outside his bar. Initially, he brought them inside, assuming the owner would return. After seeing a news report about Tonya's murder, he immediately called police. The items belonged to Tonya. When officers searched the area, they found plastic zip ties under the bar's back porch, identical to those used to bind Tonya's hands. Nearby, they also discovered rubber gloves and a partially empty box of ammunition. Then came an even bigger break. A van parked close to the bar matched the description of the one Tonya and Jay had taken from Victoria. Inside, the scene was chaotic items, smashed, scattered, and soaked in blood. Investigators recovered ferry tickets and store receipts that allowed them to reconstruct much of the couple's journey. It confirmed they had reached Seattle. Tonya's camera, which she had brought on the trip, was missing. Detectives suspected the killer had taken it. Forensic testing revealed blood from 3 people inside the van: Tonya, Jay, and an unknown man. DNA analysis was still in its early stages, and without a national database, identifying the third individual was impossible, but it ruled out Jay as the killer. Now the question became, was Jay still alive? The answer came just 2 days later. On November 26th, hunters found a body near a bridge outside Seattle. Police identified it as Jay Cook. He had suffered extensive injuries and was strangled to death. Detectives believed Jay was killed first. The perpetrator likely kept Tonya alive afterward, drove north toward Canada, murdered her, and dumped her body in the woods. Medical exams found evidence of sexual assault, and DNA testing confirmed the semen matched the unknown man's blood. From the van, investigators retraced the couple's steps using receipts. After taking the ferry to Port Angeles, they stopped for food and accidentally took a longer route. Confirmed by a receipt in Hood Sport, a store clerk remembered them asking for ferry directions and noticed a man in a brown raincoat, who appeared to be following them. After another stop in the town of Allen, Tonya and Jay reached the Seattle ferry terminal. Witnesses saw them there, but their trail ended shortly after. Police canvassed Seattle, reviewed known violent offenders, and chased every lead they could. Despite having the killer's DNA, they had no name, no match, and no suspect. Investigators believed the killer had followed the couple, gained their trust, and used a gun to control them. They also suspected the killer deliberately left evidence in visible places as a way of taunting police. Fingerprints found in the van didn't match Tonya or Jay, but they also didn't match anyone in existing databases. Then something disturbing began to happen about a month after the murders. Tonya and Jay's families started receiving letters and postcards. The sender claimed responsibility, mocked their grief, and bragged that police would never catch him. Tracing the letters was nearly impossible. All investigators could determine was where they were mailed from, and the locations changed constantly. The messages often arrived on holidays, which detectives believed was intentional cruelty. Eventually, police concluded the writer might not be the real killer. In high-profile cases, hoax letters are common. Years passed with little progress. In 2003, the killer's DNA was entered into the FBI database, but still no match. Investigators suspected the perpetrator had either never been caught or committed his crimes before DNA collection became standard. In 2010, the case appeared on national television, generating new tips. One caller identified a man who had traveled extensively and matched the letter mailing locations. Police confirmed he was responsible for the letters, but his DNA didn't match. He had no connection to the murders. The case went cold again. In 2018, detectives turned to a new approach: DNA-based facial reconstruction. A company created estimated images of the suspect at different ages. But the images didn't produce leads. Then came genetic genealogy. By uploading the killer's DNA to public databases, analysts identified a distant relative. Building out the family tree led investigators to a man named William Talbot, a truck driver living near Seattle. Police secretly collected a discarded coffee cup. The DNA was a perfect match. In May 2018, 30 years after the murders, William was arrested. At trial, the defense argued the DNA evidence was circumstantial and claimed Tonya's assault could have been consensual. Prosecutors countered with a key detail: fingerprints found in the van in 1987 now matched William. A friend also testified that a brown van had been parked outside William's home. Around the time of the murders, family members described William as violent and intimidating. None were surprised by the charges. The jury convicted him in 2019. He received 2 life sentences. Although his conviction was briefly overturned, it was later reinstated. William Talbot remains imprisoned today. Whether he committed other murders remains unknown, but investigators believe Tonya and Jay were not his first victims. Justice took decades, but it finally arrived.